Well, now you'd have thought that bailout of the Waratah train project would be seen as a salutary lesson of the perils of PPP, that's public-private partnerships, but no. The New South Wales Premier Barry O'Farrell is pushing for a national approach and a new model for them when the Council of Australian Government meets in April. The high-profile failures and a basic misunderstanding of risk have led to many calls for reforms, but some believe PPPs should be scrapped altogether. Emily Stewart reports.
Former New South Wales Premier Nick Greiner once described himself as the father of urban road tolls.
The reason I introduced PPPs was firstly because it accelerated the availability of infrastructure, secondly because the private sector does tend to do these things better than the government.
Public-private partnerships make up roughly 5% of public investment in Australia, as much as 10% in New South Wales and Victoria. The United Kingdom leads the world in public-private partnerships, which make up around 16% of infrastructure investment. The model's catching on in Europe, and after a slow start, the United States is expected to be one of the biggest users, with more than half the US states recently passing enabling legislation. And with worldwide investment markets continuing to struggle, there's growing interest in PPPs from superannuation funds.
Investments traditionally throw off a long-term annuity, inflation-linked cash flow that provides the perfect investment for industry super funds and the superannuation industry.
In Australia, many projects such as the Southern Cross Railway development in Melbourne and the M4 and M5 motorways in Sydney have worked well. But there's been a number of high-profile financial failures, including the Lane Cove Tunnel and Airport Link. Recently, the New South Wales Government was forced to tip in $175 million for the Waratah Rail project, which has led many in the industry to call for reforms.
Governments need to be not greedy. They need to set criteria which are actually about how do you get the infrastructure at the lowest cost to the public, rather than how do you get the infrastructure with the highest upfront payment to Treasury.
Infrastructure company Plenary Group has a different view on the Waratah saga. Director Ray Wilson says it's an example of the model working well.
The investors have picked up a tab well in excess of $1 billion in relation to that project. So I think the government contribution, whilst it's significant, it certainly pales into when compared against the tab that the private sector has picked up. And that again, in many respects, proves that the PPP model makes parties accountable, and it's clear when things go wrong who's obliged to fix the problem.
But former New South Wales Auditor General Tony Harris believes the entire model of PPP should be scrapped.
Well, it's all governments that have had high-profile stuff-ups. The Fay government had them, the Greiner government had them, the Carr government had them, the Emma government had them, but the model is basically wrong.
He says governments should take on infrastructure projects entirely themselves, instead of relying on PPPs to reduce debt on their books.
Even if state governments lost their AAA rating, they would be able to borrow more cheaply than the private sector.
That's a bit academic, because the truth is governments are up against the debt limits that are set by the credit rating agencies.
In Australia, there are more than 80 PPPs in planning and construction and hundreds more in the pipeline, so private investment in public infrastructure is only expected to grow.